Sometimes he would get her to click the camera when he got into the picture.
And the last one we have here is a picture dated January 1st, 1901. And we show him now. He's getting up there in age. He's in his 50s and getting well along. Curiously, Harold, there are no pictures that I have seen of him as a very old man. That he lived to be 78, I believe. And we do we have any down at this society showing him in his elder years?
He did the majority of his photography from 1890 to 1910, and then it kind of tapered off, and I don't believe there's anything after 16 or 17.
Yeah.
So. Maybe his eyesight gave out. Who knows?
Yeah. And because he was prolific while he was working, though.
Yeah.
Goodness, to take all those pictures and as you described the process a minute ago to us here, why it's just fantastic that he could do all of this.
He had a pal, Andrew Trout, who had a horse and team, and sometimes he'd bum a ride with him to different parts of the town.
But he could be seen on his bicycle with his backpack and his equipment. Which was no light load, I'm sure.
No, you had to have a tripod, and invariably he kept 2 cameras, an 8x10 camera and a 5x7 camera, and they usually went depending on the subject matter that he was taking. Most of his 4x5 camera work was copies of people in town, and I think this was sponsored by Wellington Poole, which was another buddy of his, who was the first town clerk in Wenham, not the first one, but a town clerk in Wenham, who was more or less the same age with Benjamin.
You were telling me that Wellington, Mr. Poole, was probably, you think, enabled Benjamin to get into some of the circles where he could take these pictures and not be thought of as some kind of a eccentric fellow, walking around town like that.
They'd probably make an appointment to go into somebody's home where they had some daguerreotypes, amber types, or tin types of family people, and they'd get the history of the individuals and take a copy of the original photograph. And that's mostly what he did on 4x5 glass plates.
Just imagine, though, this fellow walking around the environs of North Beverly, Wenham, Hamilton. He even went into Topsfield a little bit. What people must have thought to see this fellow come along with his equipment and set up shop and do his thing. I mean, he must have had to put up with what we'd call a few wisecracks, I'm sure, in his time. And I know in one of the references the kids sometimes used to tease him a little bit when they see him around town.
That's true.
But he had a demeanor about him, though, that you didn't tease him too much, because he could
come back and
be a bit severe.
That's the time he was in the library, and the kids kicked a football down and it hit Benny in the head, and he went tearing after him. They went out. I think one of the other things that Eddie Sargent mentioned, he remembers Benny playing the organ in the church, and if he missed a note, he'd whistle to fill in. So that's kind of interesting.
And he played by ear.
Yes, definitely.
Could not read music.
No, didn't need to even.
Well, take it all around, he was an extraordinary fellow. I mean, to do...
in his time, he was, whether he knew it or not, he was a very valuable historian for the period.
I kind of think he probably didn't realize the significance of what he actually did. Maybe he, at the end of his life, maybe. But you were mentioning to me that these plates were all found in boxes, rather callously stored.
Yes.
In other words, people at the time didn't think all that much of them, and they packed them away. And you stumbled.
No wonder they didn't throw them away.
And you, quite by accident, I think, told me that you stumbled upon them.
Well, my wife was the one that first stumbled on them, and that gets into the progress of what 20 years has probably brought about. So,
well, shall we move over now to the museum and to your workshop?
Sure.
And let's talk a little bit about what we see coming along here. Okay. Well, Harold, now we're over at the Enon building, which is connected up with the Historical Society and located right across the street from the First Church of Wenham, all of this in a little compound downtown Wenham. This is where you hang out, as it were.
That's the place, yeah. The reason it was named the Enon building is that it was originally the firehouse for the Enon hand pumper, Enon #1, and since that time it's retained its name as the Enon building. And we were fortunate enough at such time that they had to move it, and they originally probably thought of erasing the thing, and we don't.
Go ahead.
And we felt very strongly that the building itself was worth preservation, and a good place to do it was the Wenham Historical Association.
So, in other words, the building was just picked up and moved over a few feet and
correct,
deposited where we now.
Well, it's more than a few feet, and it went down the street.
Down the street, yeah. Well, anyway, this is where you all of your fine collection can be found and preserved. You do have 4 or 5 albums of prints out for the public to see, and but the real important material is safely stored and preserved in this building. Now, this began, your sojourn here began back in 1967, I think you were telling me?
Yeah.
When your wife stumbled upon some rather valuable collections up in an attic.
Yeah, I think where she was involved with the House Committee, which more or less kept the place in a fairly clean condition. Well, they got into places like the attic, and there was things up there that probably no one knew was there. But when she spotted these boxes of glass plates, and she took a look at one, and she says, "I think these are negatives." So she immediately come home and alerted me to the fact that they're up in the attic, and they're not in the greatest environment, because the attic was, in the wintertime it was cold, and in the summertime it was damp and hot, and this is the worst environment you could have for negatives.
Tell me, I'm curious, Harold, was the name of Benjamin Conant known before this event, this happening?
Yeah, I think it was, because he actually printed pictures. I had them printed and mounted on cardboard and sold them to people. He also had postcards made of any views that people might be interested in.
Okay, so he had a reputation as a photographer, but no one up until this point knew exactly what treasures he had.
That's correct.
He had preserved for the coming generations.
I think one of the miraculous things that helped us was the fact that he was an organized creature to the extent that he put little numbers in the margin of the plates. He scratched numbers in, and he also scratched dates. And then we stumbled on these little medicine books that he kept records of the number and the date and some description of what the photograph was. So that has helped us, besides recognizing,
He probably had it in the back of his mind that hopefully these things would be preserved, or people would come after him.
It's possible.
Take it up, maybe.
Yeah, I would hate to think that it would, of course, if they destroyed the plates, which I guess they did in Hamilton, they had a photographer in Asbury Grove, and I guess his plates were pretty well ransacked.
Actually, there were 2 or 3 photographers in their day. They were all contemporaries. There was Mr. Conant, of course, that we're referring to here, but there was a fellow by the name of A.B. Norton, and another fellow by the name of Harry Durham, both of whom rather concentrated in Hamilton, as I understand it, did work in various other locales, and the 3 of them are really the leaders of their time, as far as.
you can say the three of them were interested in this new phase of dry plate photography,
Yeah.
and I think that this brought this interest to them to record history of the times.
Right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the chronology here and what happened up until the present time, Harold?
Well, in 1967 to 1968, I spent one total year in handling the glass plate negatives, and I had a sponge, moistened sponge, to clean the glass side of the negative. Now there's two sides to a negative. There's an emulsion side and a glass side. Now I should be using these gloves, but this doesn't happen to be a Conant photo, and it isn't. But the emulsion side is the dull side, and the other side is the glass side, and if this gets dirty, you can clean this and dry it off with a paper towel to get rid of the grime that would be transmitted when you're getting a print, so that they make a better print to have this side clean.
But you can't tamper with the other side.
Don't mess with the other side. I had a very fine camel hair's brush. If I saw a little dust on it, I'd kind of dust it off, but other than that. Now, I had this specifically to show the type of envelope that most of these photographs come in, and this paper was all rotten from being up in the hot attic, probably, and it deteriorated. And one of the bad things about these early envelopes was the fact that the seam was right down the middle, and the glued seam, the glue, actually stained the plate, and you can see this line running down like that.
You can at that.
And so it's vitally important that any negatives you have, you always put the emulsion side to the plain side of the envelope, not the glued side. And because it won't pick up on glass, you you can always wash the glass. Well, what we did is, because these envelopes were all deteriorating, we got a bunch of new envelopes, and each one of the photographs was numbered and named, and the date put on the envelope. That was just one of the things we did during the year. The second thing is, I have a 4x6 card file, subject card file, so that somebody wanting to know if there's a subject matter that Conant did.
We're looking at it right here, I think, Harold, maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And in doing this, it was vitally important to have this cross-reference. And then I also had a numerical book that I would run his numbers in sequence and then put the description. So I was able to get at it subject-wise, I was able to get at it number-wise, and this helped, and then we store numerically. And this process took well into a year, and the interesting part was that it motivated me to print up the subjects that were interesting, and that's what these 3 books of 5x7 plates and 1 book of 8x10 plates, which are available for viewing in the Wenham Historical Association Library.
And they are excellent prints. Right down to the last detail.
They're right from the original negative, and that's the best you can get. When you get a recopy, a print,
Yep.
you're going to lose something. And it depends on how many times you go down the road and recopying. Every time you lose a little. So this is first right off the plate, right off the negative.
It's really amazing how well, we're talking about photographs that are 100 years old from the origination. And they are excellent.
Also amazing, the majority of them were in fairly good shape in spite of the environment that they were in. And what we did is once we had them all in envelopes, we knew that they wouldn't be scratching one another. And it took a while to get them out of the attic, and this is why we needed the Enon building so that couldn't be climate control.
Little did you know when this all began how this would
One thing
evolve.
leads to another,
One
doesn't
thing
it?
to another.
Yeah.
So now we're up at point of time. Where are we now?
Well, in '69, I have notification that I printed the 4 books. 3 of them were 5x7 plate negatives, and one of the books was an 8x10. And I have arranged these books in order of coming from Beverly down Main Street and going through to South Hamilton. And as the streets branch off Main Street, like Cherry, Abba, Paris, I would go down the street and then come back again to Maine.
Just like a bus trip, Harold.
Well, like that, yeah. And a tour guide stops off at the streets. So this was, it wasn't too many years before I was able to get this thing, let's say, so it would become an